Good morning and welcome to Backchat. I'm Hugh Tiverton, your co-host today, Ada Wong. Ada, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh.
We're talking today about rendition. Government plans to amend extradition laws to allow on an ad hoc case-by-case basis return of fugitives to mainland China, Taiwan and Macau are being criticised by pan-democrats and now it seems by pro-business forces too. Should they only apply to crimes like murder to stop business people becoming innocent victims when they break the mainland's complicated laws? Are fears over human rights just paranoia? Let us know your take. You can leave a message on our Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio 3. You can email us, backchat@rthk.hk. You can call us on 233 88266. After 9:20, we're talking about the Polytechnic University students penalised for protesting over Democracy Wall on campus with a couple of academics. Once again, if you want to comment, our email address is backchat@rthk.hk. Joining us for our first discussion, we have with us, we're going to start off with Philip Dykes, a human rights lawyer, chairman of the Hong Kong Bar Association, and we have Casey Ting, who's a barrister and vice chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation, and others will be joining us in the course of the programme this morning. Let's start with Philip Dykes. Mr. Dykes, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us today. The Chief Executive has said that fears for human rights issues in the mainland are paranoia. Do you accept that? Well, what's your response to that accusation?
They're not paranoia. The concerns about the human rights situation were such that in 2017, the ratification of a proposed treaty with the mainland for extradition was pulled from the Australian Senate for precisely those concerns. It was not so much the fairness of the procedures in Australian courts, but what would happen when the person was extradited and underwent criminal processes and sentencing in the mainland. It was thought that the risk of the person return not receiving the minimum standards that the Australians would expect was such that they would not pursue the agreement. I should say that of all the extradition agreements that the PRC has negotiated with other countries over the past 20 years, I don't believe it includes one common law country.
The government has been saying that this is a loophole, that the current ordinances don't apply to other parts of the People's Republic of China, but you have also said that this is certainly not a loophole.
No, it's not. A loophole implies that there's something been omitted or overlooked. When it came to plotting the extradition laws 20-odd years ago, the deliberate decision was made to exclude the possible application of those laws to the mainland and other parts of China. So it's not a loophole. As I say, that was a deliberate choice. It may be that you say that 20-odd years later things have changed and it's time to revisit that exemption, but it's not a mistake.
You said there's been no extradition involving common law countries? But there has been, correct me if I'm wrong, I've seen reports.
I said there has been no agreement concluded. Some common law countries, I believe Canada, have returned individuals.
On the basis similar to that being proposed.
On an ad hoc basis.
Which is what this is.
No, yes, on an ad hoc basis. I'm not sure whether if you looked at those cases, it was what we call a true extradition, removing somebody who was legally within Hong Kong, or somebody who is in Canada who is vulnerable to removal because of their immigration status. You can remove a person from a country through extradition processes or through immigration processes. So if somebody no longer has a permit to stay in the country, they're vulnerable to being removed.
Okay, so neither of us know whether that applies in this case. Nevertheless, as you say, there have been people transferred to the jurisdiction, to Chinese jurisdiction, from countries, so including Canada, including the US, correct me if I'm wrong, including EU countries?
I believe that the EU, 2 or 3 EU countries do have agreements with China.
it's a bit weird that they trust China and we don't, and when we are China.
Well, no, as I say, you go back to the exemption made 20 years ago, and you say, what has changed in those 20 years, such as that we remove that exemption? Now, when you negotiate an extradition agreement country to country, you'll be motivated by interests that you have, but there'll always be a bottom line. Am I prepared to treat with this country on this basis what it wants? If you're not satisfied that assurances that are being offered are such that would provide your citizen, if they were returned to that country, minimum rights, you're not entering into an agreement. So it all depends exactly on the terms of the agreement between a European Union country and the mainland. I don't have that. We talk about ad hoc agreements, but I've not yet heard what is contemplated would be the assurances, the terms that will be offered by the mainland authorities. As I say, that's the next thing I think for the government to answer, because people would have concerns about being returned to the mainland for trial and criminal course when there are well-documented stories of people being obliged to undergo forced confessions, being denied legal representation in courts, having trials behind closed doors. I mean, our assurances are going to be constructed so as to provide the Hong Kong government with the comfort that that will not happen. Because even when there is an agreement negotiated between two countries and they do their best to abide by these terms, there will be occasionally the cases where the receiving country will have not followed exactly to the letter the terms of the agreement.
Okay, well, let's bring in now Casey Ting. Mr. Ting, a barrister, I'd say Vice Chairman of the Legal Exchange Foundation. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Good morning, Mr. Dai.
Thanks for joining us today. I mean, does this come down to a matter of trust, and do we have reason to mistrust the judicial process on the mainland? You know, with all those things we've been hearing about, secret trials, people disappearing into detention, public confessions being given and things like this. They're not they're not the kind of law practice that we're used to in Hong Kong or that we aspire to in Hong Kong.
That's right. Yes. I have one point in reply to Mr. Dai's observation. Mr. Dai's observation are very right, but I'm afraid to say something slightly different. Mr. Dai just mentioned people have concerned being returned to the mainland China with insecurity in terms of their right. I would say before this comment, before this statement, I will add in the very basis of Security Bureau's proposed amendment. All right, and the proposed amendment is to authorize the chief executive to issue certificate only, and on the strength of the CE's certificate, and the law enforcement agency can apply. The key words is to apply for arrest warrant from the court. Okay, and if arrest warrant is obtained successfully and the arrest warrant is executed, and we have arrest person in Hong Kong within Hong Kong jurisdiction, and within Hong Kong we have the protection of Hong Kong law, right? And the arrest person can put all arguments in opposition of the issuing of the arrest warrant by way of judicial review. And he can put forward through the mouth of counsel to say, my life is in danger if I send back to China, or my fundamental human rights are being deprived of from me because of this, because of that. And all the adversarial systems, the essence, the beauty of adversarial system comes in. And the arrest individual can have the appellate benefit, appellate court benefit, and he can have the benefit of laws in the court of final appeal.
Okay, Philip Dykes.
So what I'm trying to say is we are not putting an equation between the arrest warrant and then automatic expeditions of the arrest person back to China. We have in the middle, we have Hong Kong judiciary.
Okay, Philip Dykes.
There's no doubt that you will get a Rolls-Royce service in the Hong Kong courts undergoing extradition process. You've got independent judges, impartial judges. But the whole point about extradition is that it is not meant to afford the individuals, the subject of an extradition request, the opportunity to rehearse each and every detail of their cases in the mainland. You negotiate an agreement, you conclude one on the basis that you trust the other side. You trust that a fair trial will be offered because the assurance is given to you during the negotiation stage. And the grounds for resisting extradition are set out in the relevant ordinance. They're very limited. The court is discouraged from entering into a minute examination of what the case might turn out to be in the mainland. You can raise objections which are recognised that the offence for which you're being sought is a political offence, or that you are being prosecuted for illegitimate political reasons, or you're being persecuted on grounds of race. These are all discrete individual grounds of objection. But the principle is of non-inquiry into the overall merits of the case, because the court works on the basis that these things we can look into, these things we can't look into. And there is no opportunity for a wide-ranging invitation to the court to examine the human rights record of the Chinese courts. So, for example, he would not be able to say, well, I can't get a fair trial because it's well known that judges are all members of the Communist Party and I'm anti-communist. The court will not enter into that kind of debate with you.
Okay, well, let's bring in now also Jason, who's convener of the Progressive Lawyers Group, joins us on the line. Anderson, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks for joining us today. There were reports that the Business and Professionals Alliance, a pro-establishment grouping, as well as the Liberal Party, have suggested to the Hong Kong government that white-collar offences be exempted from the list of crimes covered by these proposals. They say that people might fall foul in business issues or fall foul of the complicated tax system in the mainland, and that these new rules should be applicable only to things like the case in Taiwan, as it seems, where there is a murder. That sort of crime would be more appropriate to be dealt with by this new legislation. What do you think of that? Is that a good compromise?
Well, I do agree that shortening the list of crimes that would form the basis for extradition would help, but I think the crux of the issue is not so much that the mainland laws are complicated, or it's easy to run afoul of them. After all, if you work or live on the mainland, it's your obligation, to understand local law and to comply with them. The key concern here is what Phil had pointed out earlier, that, we are entering into an extradition arrangement with a jurisdiction with which we have very little faith that the wanted individual will have, a promise of due process and fair trial. the key concern, it really comes down to our faith in the criminal justice system on the mainland. And as you mentioned earlier, Hugh, there are so many reported incidents of forced confessions, sham trials, fabricated charges, just yesterday, the Canadian ex-diplomat Michael Corvick was charged for stealing intelligence, and it was sort of a clear perception that was in retaliation to the Man Wanzhou treatment.
Okay, but we've heard that other countries have returned fugitives to mainland China. I mean, countries like Canada, like the US, like European countries, and so on, places that are not the Wild West, as it were, and that also, as we were hearing from Casey Ting, anything in Hong Kong, this would have to go through the courts. We can be assured that the courts will look at the evidence and consider on a case by case basis whether there is justification. Are you not reassured by that?
Well, I just don't buy the government's argument that that this new proposal is a way to plug a loophole, because I really don't see the current situation as a loophole, because it's not an accident that China was specifically excluded from the two extradition ordinances. It was after painstaking negotiation during the pre-handover negotiation that, out of concern for human rights abuse and political persecution on the mainland, that we decided we're not yet ready to enter into that kind of arrangement with mainland China. And I don't want the government to all of a sudden change a very well-settled arrangement on the pretext that they want to bring to justice one homicide perpetrator in Taiwan.
Yes, Jason, I was going to ask you about that. The Security Bureau is saying that, this move is in response to this recent homicide case in which the Taiwan authorities was unable to prosecute this Mr. Chan. So short of amending these extradition laws, do we have other alternatives?
Well, if the government's proposal is to amend the extradition law, then our response is, well, why do you have to, sort of use a sledgehammer to squash a fly? All you needed to do is to limit the amendment to allow extradition in Taiwan. If you are, serious about bringing to justice the, murderer responsible for the Taiwanese murder, why do you have to expand it to other parts of Greater China? And that's fine. There are counter arguments that, well, Taiwan is, sort of diplomatically part of a Greater China, so it has to be looked at, as a whole. But I don't buy.
So why not Macau as well? Why can't we include Macau as well?
Well, the thing is, if we have a case here concerning Taiwan, then we should look at Taiwan. That's sort of just a simple logic. Why do we have to expand the extradition arrangement to other jurisdictions, especially to those jurisdictions that we have very little faith in their criminal justice system?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Can we put that to Casey Ting? If we're worried about what's happening in Taiwan, why don't we just solve it by striking a deal which would involve Taiwan? Why do we have to bring in mainland China?
Well, I think we can't really. This is a golden opportunity, if I might suggest. This event is a golden opportunity for the Security Bureau to do something about a sort of out-of-date ordinance in Hong Kong. We have with those two relevant ordinance, mutual legal assistance in criminal matters ordinance and fugitive offenders ordinance. This is the first point to make. The reason why I say is since 1997, and these two ordinances came into force, and we could not see any instance, any cases reported or unreported having the criminality as similar to our case. I'm talking about Hong Kong resident suspect in the Taiwan murder case. This is my personal comment. I say because of this murder case, the Security Bureau has been put in a rather embarrassing position, because we look at the nature of this murder case. Okay, this is the most serious offense in the regime of criminal law. Okay, if we look at the criminal law as a spectrum, on the left-hand side, far left-hand side, we have shoplift of $1, $2.
Yeah, okay, it's a serious offence. Yeah.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is now the position is no longer acceptable, and the Security Bureau needs to do something to do justice to the individual family of Hong Kong.
All right.
Because right after, yes.
I'm sorry, I missed your answer to the question. Why apply this to the whole of China? Why not just Taiwan? If the problem you're citing is Taiwan, why not do it just in Taiwan?
Yes. We have in the mainland China. China has signed many extradition agreements with other countries around the world. My data tells me we have China has signed 39 such agreements with other countries, and China has developed cooperation with 52 countries around the world. So we can see many other peoples apart from Hong Kong people. Other peoples are very happy shaking hands with the Chinese people in the mainland. Why don't we have the courage? Why don't we have the courage to leave our comfort zone and to enter speaking in the capacity of a council? Why don't we have the courage to enter the unfamiliar territory and start develop a new branch of criminal law? So that is reason why. And to answer your question in a very short manner, I say China's legal system is recognized as a good system in the international level, and there's no reason why we deliberately taking a hostile...
Philip Dykes, you want to respond?
To China, yes.
Mr. Dykes?
I should say that the Taiwan case, but for the statutory limitation of the Treaty of Vendors orders, is an ideal case for it to have an ad hoc agreement, because the Taiwanese legal system is fairly mature. It can give assurances about how people will be treated there. I know that the United Kingdom did a deal with Taiwan 4 or 5 years ago on an ad hoc basis, because it does not recognize Taiwan through normal diplomatic relations, but on a one-off basis, it agreed to return a British citizen to undergo a sentence. He'd been tried in Taiwan, he'd fled Taiwan, he was returned for sentence. And the Taiwan government gave assurances to the British government, and they're examined in the court, as to how he will be dealt with. Now, that's fine. The UK government's obviously satisfied that the standard they would expect for treatment was met. But at the moment, we have had no explanation as to what has changed in the mainland, such that we should, within the space of a few weeks, go from total exclusion to a potential cooperation on many, many cases. Because if the situation has improved tremendously and you have complete confidence in the mainland system, then you should be looking towards having a regular agreement, as you would with a
full agreement, not just ad hoc. Okay, well, we've got a break now for the news at 9 o'clock, and I think say goodbye for the moment to Jason, convener of the Progressive Lawyers Group. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. James Toe, we hope, joining us after the news at 9. We're also going to be talking about the case of those Polytechnic University students being disciplined by the university authorities. What do you make of that? Drop us a line. backchat@rthk.hk is the email address. The weather now before the news at 9 o'clock. It's going to be cloudy today with a few showers. Sunny until then in the afternoon, temperatures up to 23 degrees. The outlook, occasional showers and thunderstorms in the next few days. And it's going to be slightly cooler on Thursday and on Friday. And readings at the moment, let's see, 21 Celsius, and the relative humidity is up at 94%. Back in 3 minutes' time.
Street. We're staying mobilised, and here we are showing our face after a successful international tour and the recognition by the whole planet of the humanitarian aid needed by the people. This should clearly be the message at this moment. We're here in Venezuela, we're strong, we're moving forward.
You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back. This is Backchat on a Tuesday morning with Ada Wong and me, Hugh Tiverton. We're continuing to talk about the proposed changes to rendition laws, extradition laws. We have with us now Casey Ting, who's a barrister, vice chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation, and Philip Dykes, a human rights lawyer and chairman of the Hong Kong Bar Association. We're also joined now by legislator from the Democratic Party, James Toe. Later we're going to be talking about concerns over the way that some postgraduate students and other students were penalised at the Polytechnic University over protests over the democracy wall. If you want to comment on that or the matter of rendition / extradition, drop us a line, backchat@rthk.hk. I hesitate to ask what the difference is because I will have to pay a lot of money to get the answer, probably, from the assembled lawyers here. Okay, some comment from listeners. Backchat@rthk.hk is our email address. We'd like to hear from you. Okay, Drake says, I am extremely worried about this amendment. The mainland never explicitly persecute dissidents politically, but prosecute them with other crimes. The renowned artist Ai Weiwei was prosecuted for tax evasion. If the mainland submit the same evidence to the Hong Kong court, the court will probably have no choice but to announce that it makes a prima facie case on the basis of the alleged borrowed tax evasion crime, and in the end enabling the extradition, hence persecution. Whoever, including the legal exchange guy, thinks that the mainland would play by the rule of common sense is being naive. The court would not be given the correct or adequate crime to judge. There's not going to be a political prosecution. It's always some other borrowed crimes. That comes from Drake. That's also echoed in another email. This is from John, who says, everyone knows, the CE knows, the people know, the mainland does not have a sound legal system where people are held for years without contact with lawyers, held for political views, etc., etc. If the mainland calls for extradition of the illegal Independence Party member for a petty offence, will the CE and her sycophants follow orders? And on Facebook, TC says the promise that extradition to mainland China won't apply to political cases won't provide much reassurances to Hong Kong. The mainland authorities accused Ai Weiwei of tax evasion, says TC. Thanks very much indeed for that. And S says the so-called lawyer, Priscilla, said that businessmen should be exempted from extradition laws. Well, a businessman can always use his money or loot to get someone else to perform those gruesome crimes on his behalf. What then? Is Hong Kong going toward the path of Venezuela / Zimbabwe? Asks S. Thank you very much indeed. Once again, if you want to comment, backchat@rthk.hk is the address. And one from Peter here, who says the courts in China are subject to the authority of the Communist Party and judges are administrators, as the policy white paper on Hong Kong of a few years ago made clear. Human rights in the mainland, which were never good, appear to be deteriorating. What has happened to the former head of Interpol, for example, who disappeared while he was back in China? What is happening in the camps in Xinjiang? Human rights lawyers and many others are now being prosecuted on the grounds of subversion of state power, while the courts are being told, for example, in that white paper, that they have a duty to uphold national security. What basis is there for confidence that rendition arrangements will not be used as another tool to suppress political dissent in the mainland, and for being certain that the Hong Kong courts will be able to resist any such pressure? For the chief executive to call such concerns paranoia is just insulting to people in Hong Kong. That comes from Peter. James Toe, good morning to you.
Good morning.
When you look at these proposed changes, could you say that they're kind of by way of a compromise, that they recognise that there are concerns? There isn't 100% trust, frankly, in the legal system in the mainland, but having this ad hoc arrangement, having this limited range of offences in which it would apply, the fact that this has got to go through the courts, it's got to go through our court procedures, those are all ways of kind of softening the blow, aren't they? Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that the way to do it? Because we have two quite different approaches to this, and this legislation perhaps is the middle path.
I'm sorry to say that it is quite to the reverse. Because usually if we have a treaty agreement with, say, the mainland, at least we will know the full mutual arrangement. But now it seems that it's just a unilateral. That means only people in Hong Kong can be returned to mainland, but not the otherwise. And also, taking into account the negotiation of Hong Kong with the mainland for the last 20 years without any result, you know there must be severe difficulties because of the difference between the two systems, because of the various international norms which will be usually put in those rendition agreement may not be accepted by either party. So why suddenly, without the success of a concluded agreement, we suddenly unilaterally open the door? I think that is a very horrible move.
James, are you surprised that the Liberal Party also has concerns? Felix Chung was saying that, Hong Kong businessmen in China might not understand very complicated tax systems and might be charged with tax evasion and then being extradited. Do you think this is a real concern?
Yes, I'm not surprised to that because actually many Hong Kong people, including businessmen, have a lot of life experience or business experience in mainland. And there may be past dispute with partners, joint venture partners, with even your relatives having a dispute with a very old family, small, humble house. There can be many dispute with different parties in the past. But once this rendition agreement is in place, many your old adversary will go to the local police to say that you have cheated them, you have embezzled the money, you have not paid a certain tax or evasion, and there will be a lot of not just a formal rendition application, but maybe extortion from various people, including those middle or humble rank officials. Well, the businessman will be in the forefront victim, possibly.
Okay, but for sure, if this ad hoc system is put in place, there would still be an extradition hearing, and surely if a businessman has, alleged tax evasion charges, then it is not so easy to extradite him to the mainland.
Well, we must understand that there is a very big difference between the two systems. And we have to have all the so-called protection criteria put in a mutual agreement. And we have to negotiate it very clearly about the details and how to implement and what's the meaning of that. And whether we have trust in the other side's legal system, even up to a certain level, the fair trial and the honest, genuine application of those principles protected as a kind of protection in the agreement. But so far, we have negotiated with the mainland for 20 years, but no result. So I think that there must be a very big difficulty. But why suddenly that without just putting aside all those difficulties and we just open up and said, let our judge to look at the prima facie case, and then we trust all the possible trial in any kind of court, any level of court, to be fair and genuine. I think that is a very big risky move.
All right, Casey Ting, what about that question of the reciprocal arrangement?
You mean about the taxation law, right?
No, the cases that James Toe was talking about.
Yeah. Can't hear James quite well, so can you shortly repeat the question?
Okay, James Toe was talking about the lack of reciprocal arrangements. I mean, what would happen to Hong Kong people? Would they be returned to Hong Kong? Do we have arrangements on that? What do you propose there?
Yes. The reciprocal arrangement now seems not available at the moment, and because the reason why I've heard some news recently that rich people in the mainland came to Hong Kong and they obtained residency in Hong Kong, and because of some wrongdoings in the mainland China, they came to Hong Kong and they never returned to China, and they enjoy their lives in Hong Kong, left, right, center. They have parties every night, and personally, I dealt with a couple of clients who have many serious matters happen in the mainland China, but they live a beautiful life in Hong Kong. And what I advise them, I say, because Hong Kong has no extradition arrangement with China, and because we have a one country, two system, you can continue your life in Hong Kong. So what I meant to say is the necessity, and here is we need to have this kind of unilateral arrangement to start with.
All right, James Toe?
Yes.
James Toe?
Sorry?
Yeah, do you want to respond to that?
The point is, I think we must take into account all the possibilities, especially when, we don't have if we don't have a comprehensive and good agreement, then this so-called the one-off thing will be a big risk to our people, not just Hong Kong people, but even international businessmen traveling through Hong Kong. So I think it will undermine our image of an international commercial business center. I think it's a very risky thing.
Philip Dykes, your views?
There are so many things to touch upon. I will address the question of white-collar crime being exempted. It seems to be rather odd. It seems to be saying, well, we trust you to have a proper system such that we will return.
Well, okay, but there is a list of offences as it stands. Yeah. So how is that list compiled? What's the thinking behind that list?
Well, you would go through your own criminal catalogue and pick out the more common and more serious offences you don't wish to burden the other country with whom you treat with minor offences. So in all extradition arrangements there are usually 10 or 15 standard offences, and that would include things like theft and fraud. Now, in Hong Kong there will be several statutory offences which will make up what we call theft and fraud. We understand the concepts by reference to those offences. The Hong Kong court would look at the foreign legal system and say, have you got something similar? You need not call it the same, theft or fraud as we do it, but the elements are the same. So I can't understand the plea to exempt the white-collar crime, because it works on the whole basis that you know whether the conduct you are performing could amount to an offence in Hong Kong on the mainland, and in those circumstances double criminality is satisfied. You have the same offence on both sides. If the offence in the mainland is strange, you would say this is fraud, but not as we know it fraud. It's something completely different. The courts will not extradite. So that would be the protection. But it seems to me that the exemption for white-collar crime seems to be more a mistrust of the mainland courts, that they will not get a fair trial for those offences. And that is not having confidence in the system as a whole.
Yeah, Casey Ting, what's your view on restricting further the list of offences and excluding white-collar crime as suggested by the Business and Professional Alliance, who are quite a powerful, influential body, by the way, aren't they?
Yes. Mr. Dai, without any delay, I go quickly with you in your observation about the oddity of exclusion of white-collar crimes. What I'm trying to say is successful businessmen are very clever species of our human race. And they do business in China. They know so well the Chinese traditional way of doing things. They need to know the political system of China, and they need to know a bit, not in greater detail, the legal system of China. And all those knowledge are the foundations, are the reasons of their success in business in China. And also they have money, they have lots of cash to hire in-house lawyer to look at their taxation matters. If things go wrong, criminal matters, tax evasion go wrong, we are talking about tax evasion with intent of doing so. So this is a very serious offense. We need to make a distinction between tax evasion with direct intent, and we have another kind of wrongdoings that is a tax evasion by mistake. So, in light of this distinction, and we put carelessly exemption to all these white-collar offense, and this will become a seal for tricky businessmen. I would do it because I'm exempted. So, what a wonderful world, right? So the law cannot go on this way, in my opinion.
All right, so some more comment from listeners, mixed bag. Thomas says, Dear Backchat, leaving the legal matters aside, Hong Kong is China, and for political reasons you cannot make an agreement with Taiwan which does not apply to the rest of China. As it is, Hong Kong is part of the PRC, and according to the PRC, Taiwan is part of China. That observation from Thomas. Jeff asks, would the agreement be retrospective? And Sam says, Dear Backchat, why is China being painted black all the time, as though the rest of the world is squeaky clean? Isn't there anything at all what China does it right? What makes people think China is black? Aren't these all opinions? We need to look into every issue on a case-by-case basis, not only when dealing with China, as a matter of fact, with every country in the world as well. This is just plain China bashing. That comes from Sam, that observation from Sam. James Toe, doesn't this come down to whether you or not you support the PRC? And in the end, that question comes down to it doesn't matter whether you support the PRC or not, because we're part of the PRC.
No, I think there will be some objectivity on, say, the assessment of whether a country having the rule of law, having a fair court system, or even you have independent lawyers defending your rights. I think there are a lot of agencies in the world to rank different countries. Mm-hmm. I think always there are a big gap between Hong Kong and the mainland, PRC. I think the worst is even this amendment, proposed amendment, will add to all the countries in the world, including those countries which, well, Hong Kong government would not even mind to negotiate any treaty with those countries. But suddenly, we open up to them and all the countries in the world, including those the worst, most worst, and not well, I don't want to say bad words, but is an ungovernable regime. So suddenly we open up to all that. I think it's really seriously undermine the one country two system, and also the Hong Kong as a kind of a free place and a safe place.
Okay, well, James Stowe, thank you very much indeed. One more comment from Tom in Wan Chai, who says, will China really sit back and allow Hong Kong to decide who can be extradited to the mainland, including Macau, once there is an extradition ordinance? The publisher handed over in Thailand. Under this proposed ordinance, could Hong Kong refuse to extradite him, or the publishers abducted from Hong Kong? ? People in Hong Kong calling for independence, a crime in China. In Hong Kong? ? How will Virginia's stalled and infamous Article 23 relate? We value our independent judiciary, but there are lots of mainland-friendly lawyers, potential judicial future appointees around. Any implications for independence longer term? Can one imagine law professor Priscilla Leung on the bench? On the subject of the treatment of the Polytechnic University students, one might find justification for their treatment of the students as children. It's perhaps still more a poly than a university, and may not yet understand the freedom of discourse normally associated with academic institutions. Can we know some examples in universities and democratic countries to match the poly's action, says Tom, giving us a segue into the topic that we will be dealing with in just a moment. For the interim, thank you very much indeed to James Stowe, legislator with the Democratic Party. Thank you to Casey Ting, a barrister, vice chairman of the Legal Exchange Foundation, and chairman of the Bar Association, human rights lawyer Philip Dyke. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. 24 minutes past 9. As mentioned there by Tom, controversy continues over the case of a Polytechnic student who has been expelled and another suspended for a year after they clashed with school officials. This was over the covering of a student bulletin called the Democracy Wall that had independence posters placed on them. For comment, we're joined now by two academics. Dixon Singh, Associate Professor in the Division of Social Science at the University of Science and Technology and member of the Scholars Alliance for Academic Freedom, and Rodney Chu, who's Assistant Professor in the Department of Applied Social Sciences at the Polytechnic University, Vice Chairman of the Polytechnic University Staff Association. Good morning to both of you. Dixon,
good morning.
Good morning. Dixon Singh, first of all, this has been kind of painted as a free speech kind of issue. I think you can argue that it's the manner in which these students protested, knocking someone over, it's reported, blocking the way out, screaming at people through a loud hailer. That goes beyond our accepted boundaries of free speech. So there should be consequences.
No, but it happened only after the poly universities covering up of the big poster that is infringing on the freedom of expression.
But it doesn't matter.
I'm not saying that.
Hang on, but it doesn't matter.
100%
That's the whole point. It doesn't matter what it was in reaction to. You should still maintain maintain decency. You shouldn't knock people over. You shouldn't stick and scream in people's faces.
Well, of course I agree. As I said, I'm not saying that students' behavior are impeccable. What I'm saying is that now the punishment dispense on the students, especially the immediate expulsion of one student without any second chance of petition, is really disproportionate to the behavior, okay? To the behavior of so-called yelling, so on and so forth. And especially that kind of yelling is a direct response to the university's deliberate cover-up of the posters on the big character wall. And I think that is sending a very alarming message, not only in Hong Kong but to the international community. That is universities are towing the line of the Chinese Communist Party. Whenever universities see something that they don't like to see, like some students supporting independence of Hong Kong, which actually reflect a big tension between Hong Kong and China, or when they try to remember the democracy movement, that is the umbrella movement in 2014, then the university would just follow the lead of Beijing and cover up the democracy war, I think the damage is really enormous, especially given the immediate expulsion of the student, which, as I said, is not proportionate to the kind of behavior of the student.
Professor Singh, is there an appeal system, in the universities in Hong Kong, whereby, these students being disciplined, as we have seen, could appeal to a higher committee?
As far as I know, the sentencing, the so-called decision right now from the Polytechnic U is final, okay? And they have the students have only entered into the first round and the only round of trial, okay, under the Poly-U's jurisdiction. And given the severe punishment dispensed on the student, I think the public would only wonder what exactly have the students done that merits such punishment, especially that so far the Polytechnic U has tendered no strong evidence, no indisputable evidence that the students physically attack or deliberately push down one, if not more than one of their senior academic staff. So the entire lack of transparency of the trial also add to the worry that universities in Hong Kong are increasingly towing the line of Beijing, and in order to make sure that they will continue to get the funding from the Hong Kong government. All
right. Well, also with us, I say, is Rodney Chu from the Polytechnic University. Good morning to you, Mr. Chu.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. What's the staff attitude? What action do you think you might take with this in this case?
Well, I'm somewhat speaking for the Staff Association of PolyU,
okay.
What we call producer. Well, I think basically we believe that while behaviors of the field students might be considered reckless, we believe that the primary mission of the university is to probably nurture students with decent ethical education, and whenever needed, to provide them with opportunity for atonement so that they may get back on the right track, right? So I think it's the nature of education. So students did have misbehaviors, but if we hope students may rethink about their misbehaviors.
Okay, Mr. Chu, I think in this case the student was 30 years old.
Yeah.
He's not a teenager.
Yep. That's what I'm talking about.
He should be treated like an adult.
Yes, there could be a scale of disciplinary action. But for an educational institution, so the correctional element must be a core part, isn't it? So, once a student is expelled, and then the message goes further to say it's going to be a life ban for re-enrollment. This is something that we, even for staff, would think that is a very, very serious sentence. No matter we're talking about correctional, the so-called community service hours, or kind of so-called suspension for a kind of period, say for the case of Wing is about one year. But for the so-called most extreme students, is Mr. Ho is talking about expelling and then a kind of so-called life ban from re-enrollment.
Yes.
So,
are there any channels open to these students now?
What channels?
Are there any channels of, appealing to the highest person?
Well, that's the point I would like to follow up with you later. Just now, I heard you're saying on this. The whole point is, for this kind of so-called disciplinary committee, for the SDC, Students Disciplinary Committee, there's no external member. And unlike for staff, if the staff is going to be under kind of so-called disciplinary committee, there could be external member to try to look into the matter from an outsider's point of view. So for this kind of student case, this is not the situation as far as I know. So can there be a kind of so-called a review on the judgment and hearing system of the university on this kind of issues? And can there be a clearer punishment guideline? I think there's a concern for us if we talk about good governance.
Okay. Well, Rodney Chu, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Vice Chairman of the Polytechnic University Staff Association, and to Dixon Singh, member of the Scholars Alliance for Academic Freedom, Associate Professor at UST. Thank you very much indeed. Ada, many thanks to you. Here's the weather before we go. Cloudy with a few showers, sunny intervals though this afternoon, and the outlook: occasional showers and thunderstorms in the next few days, and then slightly cooler on Thursday and on Friday. 21 degrees at the moment, and relative humidity